Hi,
I'm Mecha.
and I'm your freestyle dance teacher.
Hey everyone, Mecha here and welcome to Fire Emblem Pitfalls. In this series, I take on misconceptions in the Fire Emblem series, and the pitfall that we'll be discussing today is ditching your dancer. The Dancer is one of the most interesting classes in all of Fire Emblem, as they have the ability to grant another action to one of your other units. This makes them extremely versatile, but in exchange, they are absolutely horrendous at fighting. They are very fragile and they usually cannot counterattack at all, and even if they can, they usually suck at it. A quick note, when I say Dancers, I also mean other classes that are functionally the same, such as the Herons from the Tellius games, Azura from Fire Emblem Fates, and the Bards from the Elite games. Sometimes these classes are referred to as refreshers, but I'm going to call them Dancers because I think it sounds better. So why do some players ditch their Dancer? When you choose to use a Dancer, you're one mistake away from an enemy slipping through your ranks and killing them, forcing you to either reset or play on without them. Even if they do survive, their inability to fight, as well as your other units can, makes them a liability, as the enemy that attacks them will end up surviving the enemy phase. In addition, Dancers tend to be less mobile than mounted units, so they have a tendency to fall behind if you simply move all your units their full movement every turn. So if left to their own devices, they can get in a couple of useful refreshes in on the first 2 or 3 turns, and after that they just end up sitting there looking pretty. For that reason, I see comments by Fire Emblem players every now and then that it's better to leave Dancers off of your roster, and instead use another combat unit or another healer. And there is some merit to that. Now you don't have to protect your fragile Dancer, and now you have a unit that can be useful throughout the entire chapter, instead of a unit that is only useful for the first couple of turns. To an extent, I think this reasoning makes sense. However, I believe that in 99% of all chapters in Fire Emblem, deploying a Dancer is a better choice than any other unit you could use otherwise. They open up so many unique strategies that you gain access to if you choose to use them, but Dancers are a special kind of support unit. They can support your team, but only if your team also supports them. They certainly have their drawbacks, and those drawbacks need addressing, but if done properly, they will widely increase your range of options. It is my goal in this video to show you how you can use your Dancers to their maximum potential. I will show you the strategies that they enable, and I will show you how you can work around their disadvantages. Am I saying you always have to use a Dancer? That you cannot be a proper elitist Fire Emblem speedrun elitist tier list LTCer if you don't? No, not at all. Play Fire Emblem however you enjoy it, but I think using Dancers is not only a good idea, but it's also a lot of fun, and I think learning how to utilize them best will make you better at the game and capable of taking on tougher challenges. So, what can a Dancer do for you? Let's start with what a Dancer brings to the table. Why would you use a Dancer instead of an extra combat unit or an extra healer? Or, in other words, what is the difference between an extra action every turn and having another unit that can do an action every turn? First of all, that extra unit you're deploying can only act as themselves. If you're deploying an extra paladin, they can fight and they can do rescue drops, but they cannot heal. If you're deploying an extra staff user, they can heal someone or provide other utility like barrier and restore, but they cannot do rescue drops. A Dancer can do either of them, depending on what you need. If you need an extra player phase attack, they've got you covered. If you need an extra staff use, they have your back. Any kind of action you need one more of, a Dancer can help you with. In addition, that extra unit you're deploying over your Dancer is probably not your best unit. If you have 10 deployment slots, they will probably be more like your 10th best fighter. So you're not getting room for another Milady or Percival here, you're getting a more mediocre unit like Thea or Noah. Your Dancer, on the other hand, can refresh the best unit currently in their range. If you want another combat action, you get to refresh your best combat unit like Milady or Percival. But if you want another staff action, you can instead refresh someone who's really good at using staves, like Mime. This is why I sometimes see people refer to Dancers as being clones of your best units. I think this statement rings true to some extent, but this is just a tip of the iceberg of what Dancers can do. Dancers also grant a significant mobility advantage because they can refresh someone after they've already moved. Depending on the game you're playing and the situation you're in, this could be only a couple of squares. After all, Dancers don't usually have a lot of movement. But if a refreshed unit is being moved towards a Dancer, you could effectively double a unit's movement and get them across the entire map in one turn. This is very nice in an emergency situation, where your team is split up and you suddenly find yourself needing one of your characters in a different part of the map. This mobility boost works extra well when trying to perform rescue drops. By dancing for a unit, they can both rescue and drop another unit within a single turn. This allows you to pick up a strong foot unit and get them like 15 squares deep into the map on turn 1. If you try to replicate this through the use of 2 mounted units, you will be able to get less far with both the rescuing unit and the unit that's being dropped. These things sound mostly useful for people trying to get low turn counts, but I think these advantages can be useful for any player. A lot of Fire Emblem maps have time-sensitive objectives where you need to get your units across the map fast. Enemies might threaten to destroy a village, steal your treasure, or kill an NPC, and dancers make it easier to make it to them in a timely fashion. Dancing might also be what you need to get to an important choke point before it is occupied by enemy forces. In a nutshell, these are the things that a dancer can do for you that no other unit can. Through dancing, they can increase your unit's mobility, utility, and combat prowess, better than any of your other units. But even after all these examples, you might wonder if you'll be able to get to use these advantages without getting tripped up by a dancer's lack of durability or mobility. Maybe you're worried that it will take extensive turn-by-turn planning to get the money's worth out of your dancer. You don't have to be perfect on your first try. So, here are a couple of quick, general tips that will almost always help you get better at dancing. Number 1. Decide how to use your dancer before doing anything else.
Think, Mark, think!
This is the best piece of advice I can give anyone wanting to improve their dancing game. Plan out your dancer's move right as player phase begins. Look at the situation as a whole and try to figure out which units you can realistically dance for and which one of them is going to benefit you the most. Most of the time, I find I'm either dancing for my best combat unit or some kind of utility that I need more of, the most common example being a restore user when I have multiple units affected by status. The reason thinking about this right away is helpful because it forces you to build your turn to accommodate your dancer. Over the course of all my years of playing Fire Emblem, I've realized that turns where my dancer's move is the first thing I figure out, they tend to be the most successful ones. On the other hand, on the turns where I move my dancer after everyone else, the options I have for my dancer tend to be either useless or even non-existent. This tip is extra helpful in games where your dancer can refresh 4 people, such as in Genealogy of the Holy War and the Tellius games. You cannot make effective use of a 4-way dance without leaving a space open for the 5 units involved. So, right as player phase starts, pick a spot where you think you'll be able to place your diamond of units and work towards maximizing your usage of it. Fortunately, these games allow units to move again after attacking, making that easier than it would be in other entries. Another reason why planning your turn with your dancer in mind is it makes protecting them easier. And to do that, you'll have to pay attention to tip number 2, which is check enemy ranges. Most of the modern Fire Emblem games allow you to check the range of all enemies at once with a single button press, so make use of it. You almost never want to leave your dancer open to attack, so it will instantly show you where you can and cannot let your dancer move. Do note, however, that enemy ranges can change depending on how your other units move, and moving a unit away after you've moved your dancer can leave your dancer exposed. In a game that doesn't have an option for checking global ranges like the Game Boy Advance Fire Emblems, you're going to have to do it manually. I usually check the enemies with the highest mobility and the enemies that are closest to me, and try to memorize their potential ranges through train patterns. That can give you a good idea where you can safely put your fragile units. Fog of War can make it especially difficult to figure out where your dancer can go without compromising their safety. You should always bring some characters or items that give you some more vision, and make sure to make use of it at the start of your turn, before you start deciding where to place your other characters. Now I will admit, during my own playthroughs I often do this incorrectly, moving my thieves and torch users late in my turn, and because of that I would discover enemies hidden in the fog after committing to a bunch of moves. Or conversely, I sometimes find myself moving these units too early, and as a result I lose vision on an enemy I could have attacked otherwise. Tip number 3 is to boost your dancer's mobility. As I touched upon earlier, dancers have average to below average mobility, depending on the game and what kind of units you're using. For example, in the GBA Fire Emblems, dancers have 5 movement, while promoted infantry units have 6 and most promoted mounted units have 8. It's a small difference of only a couple points on paper, but every time all of your units move their full movements, they are going to move further apart. On top of that, if you dance for one of your units and move them full steam ahead, chances are they will never see your dancer again unless you do something about it. And also consider that sometimes your dancer might not be able to move their full movement in the first place, since they have to stay out of enemy range. Thankfully, there is an easy solution to this, and that's rescue dropping. Dancers may not be able to move far by themselves, but they are easy to rescue drop since they tend to have very low constitution, to the point that even foot units are able to pick them up. Rescue dropping is a great way to move your dancer an extra couple squares per turn, often without any real opportunity cost. If the units you use for these actions have Canto, they can often execute them without foregoing any potential movement of their own. And even if you're low on mounted units, usually you can plan things in such a way that they lose a very minor amount of squares. Even if you have to sacrifice a couple of squares to help your dancer out, worst case scenario, you can use your dancer's next move to help him move ahead. Rescue dropping your dancer is especially helpful in large maps with low enemy density, where you have more actions available on your units than you have enemies to fight. I've found that this is fairly common in mid to late game maps in all GBA Fire Emblems, so you should be able to find a safe map to experiment with, no matter which one you happen to be playing currently. If you look for opportunities and plan them out at the start of your turn, you'll find you can often repeat these rescue drops turn after turn, and your units will be further ahead than they've ever been. It goes without saying that you should almost never pick up your dancer until they've already danced for someone. Even if there's no one else nearby, at the very least you should move the rescuing unit closer to your dancer first, dance for them, and have them pick up the dancer to get an extra couple of squares. Another simple way to get the most out of your dancer's movement is to put them at the front of your deployment during preparations. This is because the further your dancer can move, the further the recipient of the dancer can move, enemy ranges permitting of course. Sometimes I see people asking if using move boosting stat boosters such as the boots on dancers is a good idea. Generally, I think you're better off giving them to a combat unit, as this increases your options further. I prefer using methods like rescue dropping to help my dancers stay near the front lines, and this is easier to do with boots on someone else. They're not the worst recipients, but they're not the best either. Some games do not have rescue dropping, and you'll have to get a bit more creative to help your dancer catch up. In Fire Emblem Fates, you can have your dancer Azura pair up into another unit instead. Then have that unit move their full movement, switch Azura to the front and then dance for someone. That way, it's almost like your dancer has mounted movement. There's no reason to stop there though. Afterwards, you can have another unit help unpair the two so that your dancer is capable of pairing up with a mounted unit again on the next turn. Also, if you have another unit with shelter available, you can have Azura refresh multiple times in a turn. Simply refresh someone, shelter Azura, then have another unit move next to the pair, take Azura, switch and refresh again. This can get you a massive mobility boost if done right. Pair Up is of course also available as a movement booster for your dancer in Fire Emblem Awakening, but since shelter is not a thing in that game, the multi-refresh option does not exist. In the Tellius games, the Heron Raisin works differently depending on whether he's transformed or not. In his human form, his movement is pretty low, and he can only refresh one person. However, when he's transformed, he gains a significant movement boost to his mobility and he can refresh 4 people. The best way to work with Raisin's transformation, in my opinion, is to decide at the start of the chapter whether you want him to be transformed quickly or not. On some chapters, you can get a lot of mileage out of getting 3 or 4 additional actions during the earlier turns. If that's the case, use a Lagoon Stone as soon as possible, and that way you can utilize those actions while your team is still close together and it's easy to make those diamond formations. If you think it's not worth it to spend a Lagoon Stone to transform him immediately, you can instead just take 2 turns to use a Leafy Grass and wait for him to transform on turn 3. Or if you're just taking your sweet time, you can not use any items at all and instead have him refresh one other unit per turn until he maxes out his transformation gauge naturally. Before we're done, I want to give some attention to dancers in 3 houses because I've seen some seriously weird takes on them when browsing through various forums. In this game, you can choose any student to be your dancer as long as they're able to win the White Heron Cup. This is usually really easy because any unit with 13 or more charm can win it, and you can give your student of choice a dancing class for a free +5 charm bonus. Once they've won the competition, you'll be able to reclass them to dancer. I've seen some people say that dancing is outclassed by other mobility increasing options in 3 houses, such as stride, rescue, and warp. To people who say that, I just want to say they stack. You can use multiple, and these mechanics work very well in tandem. If you're trying to clear 3 houses maps quickly, sometimes you need all the mobility options you can get. And if you're just playing casually, there's no reason not to use all of them. The usual pros to dancers still apply. They still give you another turn for your broken player phase units, and they're easier to use than ever with the powerful Canto option in this game. The only reason I can see to not use your dancer is if you really want to make use of Sword of Void +20, which is a skill the winner of the White Heron Cup gets. Obviously, +20 Avoid doesn't really do much for a unit that's only dancing and not seeing any combat, so what I've seen some people do is have a unit win the White Heron Cup just to add Sword of Void +20 to their kit. From there, they stack Sword of Void +20 with skills like Alert Stance Plus, the free Avoid +10 that Wyvern Lords get, Sword Prowess 5, and anything else they can get to increase their avoids to create an unhittable dodge tank. This idea technically works for surviving enemy phase, though you'll want some kind of offensive skill like Battalion Wrath to actually deal damage to enemies attacking you. I think this is a bit of a waste of your potential dancer, but to each their own. Dodge tank builds aside, I think it's generally best to use a dancer that you don't want to turn into a combat unit. After all, if a unit spends most of their time dancing, what do they need stats or levels for? Dancers work fine without ever having to battle, and if you dedicate yourself to training them up, you're effectively wasting experience. A lot of people recommend picking units with a riding boon for your dancer, such as Marianne or Ingrid. The idea is that you can get them to S rank riding quickly and obtain movement +1. While this is a nice option, it is by no means necessary, as even with a riding boon it can take a lot of time to get movement +1, depending on what difficulty you're playing. It's not a bad idea, but I think people focus on it a little too much sometimes. I do think Dancer Marianne is a good idea, since it opens up an easy clear of Hunting by Daybreak on Maddening if you're trying to skip that chapter. I have a whole video about that map if you haven't seen it yet. Outside of Hunting by Daybreak, Marianne will also be able to use Physic on turns when she's not in range to dance. On most routes, I would recommend Flayn as your dancer, since she comes for free, has enough charm to make it through the contest with ease, and she isn't exactly a fantastic combat unit anyway. Dorothea is also a great choice because of her spell list. Physic is a nice boon, just like it is for Marianne, but she also learns Meteor. Meteor is useful since it allows Dorothea to provide linked attacks and gambit boosts from far away, almost regardless of her position. Keep in mind though that the bonus is only relevant for people she supports. For that reason, she's most effective in her own house as well as the Blue Lions, since she has the most support partners there. And that concludes my crash course in dancing. There are far more and far deeper strategies available to optimize dancing even more, but for now, I just wanted to get across some basic strategies and ideas that you can try at home. I think dancers can be fun and rewarding units to use for everyone, no matter what kind of playthroughs you're doing. Their drawbacks provide challenges to players, but when used properly, they open up options that are completely out of reach otherwise. That's going to be it for this episode of Fire Emblem Pitfalls. As always, I'd like to thank my Patreons for providing the support I need to be able to spend time creating these longer scripted videos, especially my A-tier Patreons whose names are currently on your screen. My patrons get all sorts of benefits such as sneak peeks at my upcoming videos and hanging out in the Patreon chat on my Discord server. And of course, my S-tier patrons get the benefit of hearing me horribly butcher their names at the end of videos like this. Thank you to Abaddon, Arkholt, Beiku, Ben Dion, Blue Caterade, Jacob, Command List, Crimson Blader, Danielle, D, Ice Lake, Curaçao, Jesus Kun 69, Modi, Moo, Nikhil, P. Vladias, Schmeep, Scott, Severin Cheer, Skylar, Swordlocked, Zelda, and Boards42. And while I'm out here thanking people, I might as well give a big shout out to Davis for putting the video together in such a wonderful way, and thanks to Icarus for helping out as well. And last but not least, thanks to you for watching. If you want to put your dancing skills to the test, please give the thumbs up button another turn by clicking it. That should make it turn from gray to blue. And while you're down there, feel free to subscribe for more Fire Emblem videos. Peace around and goodbye.